Book of Heaven, Volume 5, Part 2. June 6, 1903. Jesus teaches her how she must behave in the state of abandonment and of sufferings. After going through bitter days of privations and of sufferings, this morning I found myself outside of myself, with baby Jesus in my arms. As soon as I saw him, I said, "Ah, dear Jesus, how could you leave me alone? At least teach me how I must behave in this state of abandonment and of sufferings." And he, "My daughter, offer everything you suffer, in your arms, in your legs, and in your heart, together with the sufferings of my members, by reciting 5 glory bees, and offer it to divine justice to satisfy for the works, the steps, and the bad desires of the hearts that creatures commit continuously. Unite then the sufferings caused by the thorns and those of the shoulders with the recitation of 3 glory bees, and offer it for the satisfaction of the 3 powers of man that are so disfigured that I can no longer recognize my image in them. And try to keep your will always united to me and in continuous attitude of loving me. Let your memory be the bell that rings within you constantly, and reminds you of what I have done and suffered for you, and of how many graces I have given to your soul, so as to thank me and be grateful to me, since gratitude is the key that opens the divine treasures. Let your intellect think of nothing, and occupy itself with nothing but God. If you do this, I shall find again my image in you, and I shall take the satisfaction that I cannot receive from the other creatures. And you must do this continuously, because if the offense is continuous, continuous must be the satisfaction." Then I added, "Ah, Lord, how bad I have made myself. I have become even gluttonous." And he, "My daughter, do not fear. When a soul does everything for me, everything she takes, even refreshments themselves, I receive as if she were refreshing my suffering body. And those who give them to her, I consider as if they were giving them to me. So much so that if they did not give them, I would feel pain. But in order for you to remove any doubt, every time they give you some refreshment, and you feel the necessity to take it, you shall not only do it for me, but shall add, 'Lord, I intend to refresh your suffering body within mine.'" While saying this, little by little he withdrew into my interior, and I could no longer see him and talk to him. I felt such pain that because of the sorrow I would have torn myself to pieces to be able to find him again. So I began to tear the part of my interior in which he had enclosed himself, and so I found him, and with highest sorrow I said, "Ah, Lord, how can you leave me? Are you perhaps not my life, such that without you, not only the soul but also the body is completely shattered, and cannot bear the intensity of the pain of your privation? So much so that it seems to me that I am going to die right here and now. My only and sole comfort, death." But as I was saying this, Jesus blessed me and withdrew into my interior again. He disappeared, and I found myself inside myself. June 15, 1903. how the creature can preserve the creative, redemptive, and sanctifying works of God within herself. As I was in my usual state, I don't know how, I saw my adorable Jesus inside my eye. I was surprised, and he told me, "My daughter, the one who makes use of her senses to offend me, deforms my image within herself. Therefore sin gives death to the soul, not because she really dies, but because it gives death to everything that is divine. If then she uses her senses to glorify me, I can say, 'You are my eye, my hearing, my mouth, my hands, and my feet.' By this she preserves my creative work within herself, and if to her glorifying me she adds suffering, satisfying, and repairing for others, she preserves within herself my redemptive work. And as she perfects these works of mine within herself, my sanctifying work rises again, sanctifying everything and preserving it within her soul. In fact, in everything I have done in the creative, redemptive, and sanctifying works, I have transfused in the soul a participation in my very operating. However, everything is in whether the soul corresponds to my work." June 16th, 1903. What renders the soul more dear, more beautiful, more lovable, and more intimate with God is her perseverance in operating to please Him alone. Continuing in my usual state, I found myself outside of myself, and I saw baby Jesus with a cup full of bitterness and a stick in his hand. And he said to me, "See, my daughter, what a cup of bitterness the world continuously gives me to drink." And I, "Lord, share it with me so you won't suffer alone." So he gave me to drink a little bit of that bitterness, and then with the stick he had in his hand, he began to pierce the place of my heart through, to the point of making a hole from which a rivulet of that bitterness that I had drunk came out. However, it was changed into sweet milk, and went into the mouth of the baby, who was all sweetened and refreshed. Then he told me, "My daughter, when I give to the soul bitterness, tribulations, if the soul conforms to my will, is grateful to me, thanks me for it, and offers it to me as a gift, for her it is bitterness, it is suffering, but for me it changes into sweetness and refreshment. But what cheers me the most and gives me the most pleasure is to see that the soul, whether she operates or suffers, is all intent on pleasing me alone, with no other end or purpose of recompense. However, what renders the soul more dear, more beautiful, more lovable, more intimate with the divine being, is her perseverance in this way of conducting herself that renders her immutable with the immutable God. In fact, if today she does something and tomorrow she doesn't, if one time she has one end and another time another, if today she tries to please God and tomorrow creatures, she is the image of one who today is queen and tomorrow a most miserable servant. Today she nourishes herself with delicious foods, tomorrow with filth. After a little while he disappeared, but a little later he came back adding, "The sun is there for the benefit of all, but not everyone enjoys its beneficial effects. In the same way, the divine sun gives its light to all, but who enjoys its beneficial effects? The one who keeps his eyes open to the light of truth. All others, even if they are exposed to the sun, remain in the dark. However, it is the one who is all intent on pleasing me that truly enjoys and receives all the fullness of this sun. June 30th, 1903. The Most Holy Virgin teaches the soul how to keep her interior gaze fixed on Jesus. The beauty of the interior soul. As I was outside of myself, I saw the Queen Mother, and prostrating myself at her feet, I said to her, "My most sweet Mother, in what terrible constraints I find myself, deprived of my only good, and of my very life. I feel I am touching the extremes." While saying this, I was crying, and the Most Holy Virgin, opening herself at the place of her heart, as if she were opening a tabernacle, took the baby from within it and gave him to me, telling me, "My daughter, do not cry. Here is your good, your life, your all. Take him and keep him always with you, and as you keep him with you, keep your interior gaze fixed on him. Do not be embarrassed if he does not tell you anything, or if you are unable to say anything. Just look at him in your interior, and by looking at him, you shall comprehend everything, you shall do everything, and you shall satisfy for all." This is the beauty of the interior soul, without voice, without education, since there is no external thing that attracts her or upsets her, but all of her attraction, all of her goods are enclosed in her interior. By simply looking at Jesus, she easily comprehends everything and does everything. In this way, you shall walk up to the top of Calvary, and once we reach it, you shall no longer see him as a baby, but crucified, and you shall remain crucified together with him. So it seemed that with the baby in my arms, and together with the Most Holy Virgin, we walked the way of Calvary. While walking, at times I would find someone who wanted to take Jesus away from me, and I would call the Queen Mother to my help, saying to her, "My mamma, help me, for they want to snatch Jesus away from me." And she would answer me, "Do not fear, your care must be in keeping your interior gaze fixed on him. This has so much power that all other powers, human and diabolical, remain debilitated and defeated." Now, while we were walking, we found a temple in which Holy Mass was being celebrated. At the time of Holy Communion, I flew to the altar with the baby in my arms in order to receive communion. But what was not my surprise when, as soon as Jesus Christ entered into me, he disappeared from my arms. Then, after a little while, I found myself inside myself. July 3rd, 1903. If the soul gives herself completely to Jesus in life, Jesus gives himself to her at her death and exempts her from purgatory. This morning, as I was highly afflicted because of the loss of my adorable Jesus, all of a sudden he made himself seen in my interior, filling my person completely. That is, my head, my arms, and all the rest. As I was seeing this, almost wanting to explain to me the meaning of the way he was making himself seen, he told me, "My daughter, why do you afflict yourself? if I am the master of the whole of you? And when a soul comes to rendering me the master of her mind, of her arms, of her heart, and of her feet, sin cannot reign. And if something involuntary enters into her, since I am the master and the soul is under the influence of my lordship, she is in continuous attitude of purgation, and that something immediately goes out of her. Furthermore, since I am holy, it is difficult for her to retain within herself anything that is not holy. Even more, since she has given all of herself to me in life, it is justice that I give all of myself to her at her death, admitting her to the beatific vision without delay. So if one gives herself completely to me, the flames of purgatory have nothing to do with her. August 3rd, 1903. The more the soul strips herself of natural things, the more of the supernatural and divine things she acquires. As I was in my usual state, my adorable Jesus came for just a little, making me hear his most sweet voice, saying, "The more the soul strips herself of natural things, the more of the supernatural and divine things she acquires. The more she strips herself of the love of self, the more of the love of God she acquires. The less she tires herself in knowing human sciences and enjoying the pleasures of life, the more knowledge she acquires of the things of heaven, of virtue, and the more she shall enjoy them, as the bitter ones shall convert into sweet. In sum, these are all things that proceed at the same pace, in such a way that, if one feels nothing of the supernatural, if the love of God is extinguished in the soul, if one knows nothing about virtues and the things of heaven, and finds no pleasure in them, then he knows reason very well. October 2nd, 1903. The one who is united with Jesus grows in his very life, gives development to the graft he made in redemption, and adds more branches to the tree of his humanity. The interior and the exterior souls. As I was in my usual state, all embittered and afflicted, and almost dazed because of the privation of my adorable Jesus, not knowing myself where I was, whether in hell or on earth, I just barely saw him, like a flash that escapes, saying, "The one who is on the path of virtues is in my very life, and one who is on the path of vice is in contradiction with me." And he disappeared. A little later, in another flash, he added, "My incarnation grafted humanity to the divinity, and if one tries to remain united with me with his will, with his works, and with his heart, trying to carry out his life according to the standard of mine, it can be said that he grows in my very life and gives development to the graft made by me, adding more branches to the tree of my humanity. If, on the other hand, he does not unite with me, in addition to not growing in me, he gives no development to the graft, but rather, since one who is not with me cannot have life, hence, with perdition the graft is undone." And he disappeared again. After this I found myself outside of myself, inside a garden, in which there were several rose bushes, some nicely bloomed, in the right proportion, almost half closed, and others with petals falling off, to the point that a slight movement was enough to prune them, leaving just the stem of the rose, naked. A young man, I don't know who he was, said to me, "The first roses are the interior souls who operate in their interior. These souls are symbolized by the rose petals that are turned inwards, adding a distinction of beauty, of freshness, and of solidity, with no fear that some petals may fall to the ground. The external petals symbolize the blooming that the interior soul does outwards, receiving life from within her. Her works are fragrant with holy charity, and almost like lights, they strike the eyes of God and of her neighbor. The second rose bushes are the exterior souls. The little good that they do is all external, and in the sight of everyone. Since there is no interior blooming, there cannot be the aim for God alone and His love alone. And because this is lacking, the petals, that is the virtues, cannot be well attached. So as the blowing breath of pride comes, it makes the petals fall off. As the breaths of complacency, of love of self, of esteem of others, of contradictions, of mortification come, they just barely touch the rose, and the petals fall down to the ground. So poor Rose, she remains always naked, without petals, with only thorns left that prick her conscience. After this, I found myself inside myself. October 3rd, 1903. Jesus continues his life in the world, not only in the Most Holy Sacrament, but also in the souls who are in his grace. I was thinking about the hour of the Passion, in which Jesus took leave of his mother to go to his death, and they blessed each other. And I was offering this hour to prepare for those who do not bless the Lord in everything, but rather they offend him, in order to impetrate all those blessings that are necessary for us to preserve ourselves in the grace of God, and to fill the void of the glory of God, as if all creatures were blessing him. While doing this, I felt him move in my interior, saying, "My daughter, in the act of blessing my mother, I also intended to bless each creature individually, and all in general, in such a way that everything is blessed by me. Thoughts, words, heartbeats, steps, and movements made for me. Everything has been given value by my blessing. Even more, I tell you, that everything good that creatures do was all done by my humanity, so that all the works of creatures might first be divinized by me. Furthermore, my life, real and true, still continues in the world, not only in the Most Holy Sacrament, but in the souls who are in my grace. And since the capacity of the creature is very limited, and one of them alone is unable to catch everything I did, I act in such a way as to continue my reparation in one soul, praise in another, thanksgiving in another. In some others, my zeal for the salvation of souls. In another, my sufferings, and so with all the rest. According to how they correspond to me, I carry out my life within them. Therefore, think of what constraints and pains they put me into. While I want to operate in them, they do not pay attention to me." Having said this, he disappeared, and I found myself inside myself. October 7th, 1903. The victim souls are human angels who must repair, impetrate, protect humanity. I had asked the confessor to leave me in the will of our Lord, withdrawing the obedience that, whether he wanted it or not, I should continue to remain in this state of victim. At first he did not want it, but then he consented, as long as I would assume the responsibility of answering before Jesus Christ for what could happen in the world. And he said that I should think about it first, and then answer him. I wanted to tell him that I did not want to oppose the divine will. Only, if the Lord wants it, I want it. If he does not want it, I do not want it. So why this responsibility? And he, think about it first, and tomorrow you shall answer. So as I was thinking about it in my interior, he told me, justice wants it, love does not. Then finding myself in my usual state, I saw him for just a little, and he told me, the angels, whether they obtain something or not, always do their office. They do not withdraw from the work entrusted to them by God, of the custody of souls. Even if they see that, almost in spite of their continuous cares, diligences, industries, and assistances, souls are miserably lost, they are always there at their places. Nor do they give greater or lesser glory to God if they obtain or do not obtain, because their will is always stable in carrying out the work entrusted to them. The victim souls are human angels who must repair, impetrate, protect humanity, and whether they obtain or do not obtain, they must not cease their work, unless they were assured about it from on high. October 12th, 1903. Meanings of the crowning of thorns. This morning I saw my adorable Jesus in my interior, crowned with thorns, and in seeing him in that state I said to him, my sweet Lord, why did your head envy your scourged body, that had suffered so much and had shed so much blood? And as your head did not want to be outdone by your body, that had been honored with the frieze of suffering, you yourself incited your enemies to crown you with such a painful and tormenting crown of thorns. And Jesus, my daughter, this crowning of thorns contains many meanings, and as much as I may speak, there is always much left to be said. Indeed, the reason why my head wanted to be honored by having not a general share, but its distinct and special portion of suffering, and its own shedding of blood, almost competing with the body, is almost incomprehensible to the created mind. The reason is that it is the head that unites the whole body and the whole of the soul, in such a way that, without the head, the body is nothing. So much so that one can live without the other members, but it is impossible to live without the head, because it is the essential part of the whole of man. This is so true that if the body sins or does good, it is the head that directs it, since the body is nothing other than an instrument. Therefore, since my head was to give back regimen and dominion to men, and earn for them that new heavens of graces and new worlds of truths might enter into the human minds, rejecting the new hells of sins, because of which men reach the point of rendering themselves vile slaves of vile passions, wanting to crown the whole human family with glory, with honor, and with decorum. I wanted to crown and honor my humanity first, though with a most painful crown of thorns, symbol of the immortal crown that I was giving back to creatures taken away by sin. In addition, the crown of thorns means that there is no glory and honor without thorns, that there can never be dominion over passions and acquisition of virtues without feeling oneself being pricked deep inside one's flesh and spirit, and that true reigning is in the giving of oneself by the pricks of mortification and of sacrifice. Moreover, these thorns signified that I am the true and only king, and only the one who constitutes me king of her heart enjoys peace and happiness, and I constitute her queen of my own kingdom. So all those rivulets of blood that poured out from my head were as many little streams that bound the human intelligence to the knowledge of my sovereignty over them. But who can say all that I feel in my interior? I don't have the words to express it. Even more the little I have said, it seems to me that I said it disconnected. And I believe it must be so in speaking about the things of God, as high and sublime as is the way in that one speaks, since he is uncreated, and we are created. One cannot speak about God but in stammering. You have reached the end of the Book of Heaven, Volume 5, Part 2. Fiat.